A very warm welcome, everyone. As we speak, there is a Paris Peace Forum, a 3-day Paris Peace Forum going on in France. This Paris Peace Forum, a first of its kind, has in fact been inaugurated only yesterday, and it has followed the Armistice Centenary celebrations in France and across Europe. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918 marked the conclusion of World War I with the signing of an armistice between the Allied and the German troops. Figuratively, World War I or the Great War meant a loss of some 17 million lives and collateral damage of some other 50 million deaths due to the spread of diseases after the war. Thus, this armistice was a major relief to the European society in the year 1918, some 100 years back from yesterday. Now, in the commemorative events that were taking place yesterday in France and across Europe, there were some very strong symbolisms involved, and having a glance at those symbolisms and the impact they're going to have on the world politics is what we are going to do today. First of all, when German Chancellor Angela Merkel arrived in France the day before yesterday for attending the commemorative events, the tender holding of hands between the two leaders, French President Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel, were in itself very symbolic of the strong friendship that these days exists between these two neighboring countries, which 100 years back were at loggerheads and were in fact tearing each other apart. World War I had 1 million French deaths and a 1.7 million German deaths. But it is not this symbolism of friendship between the Germans and the French which is of very significant importance. The events this weekend in France have suggested something else. And this something else they have suggested is this. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has already declared that she is retiring from politics and will not be standing, for the elections to the Chancellor the next time, whenever they are held in Germany. And Emmanuel Macron has sort of used this entire opportunity and projected himself as the leader of European Union, and at the same time he has also presented the unity that exists in Europe, the unity between France and Germany, as a counter to the ideology of unilateralism which is being propagated everywhere in half of the world because of the right-wing leaders. Now remember this. It has been a month or so since the elections of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, who is very famously called Trump of the tropics. At the same time, we also need to remember that as these commemorative events were going on, Poland, which was celebrating 100 years of its independence also, there are also some far-right activists, anti-immigration activists were seen participating. So these events completely point out to the deep division that exists in the West and in the world between right-wing nationalism and this sort of multilateralism which was, being projected by Emmanuel Macron as, a leader of this multilateralism. Now some 72 countries were invited to this Armistice Centenary. India too was present. M. Venkaiah Naidu, our Vice President, was present there, presumably with his wife, as could be seen from the coverage. And Emmanuel Macron has used this entire weekend event to project himself as a sort of leader to these, as an alternative to the right-wing nationalism in most of the countries of the world. We need to remember the words made during his speech in which he said, and I quote, that nationalism is the opposite of patriotism and nationalism is a threat to patriotism, Emmanuel Macron declared in his remarks at the Armistice Centenary. And this when President Trump, populist leaders like President Trump, Vladimir Putin of Russia, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who is also a nationalist, far-right nationalist leader of Turkey, were present there. So these were some very significant indications from France. Also, we also need to remember here the joint press conference Emmanuel Macron did with Trump, where Trump was seen very uneasy, and Emmanuel Macron, he sort of suggested that European Union needs to have its own army, and Trump sort of Trump sort of, rejected this very idea at the same press conference. So Emmanuel Macron, very briefly, Emmanuel Macron has been trying to project, as we know that Angela Merkel has already declared she's retiring from politics. So Emmanuel Macron is trying to project himself as the next potential leader of Europe by, standing from multilateralism and standing for European unity. Now, trade and immigration are the two issues which are dividing the world on a very large scale. Back home in the United States, there are caravans of Central American immigrants heading towards America, and President Trump has already ordered the American troops to be present at the Mexico border to prevent their entry into the country. Same is the case with Jair Bolsonaro, who is the newly elected far-right nationalist leader of Brazil, who has already according to some reports, posed threats to the indigenous peoples of Brazil by sort of declaring of a genocide against them. Similarly, across Europe, there have been cases of an entire ship of immigrants from Africa being returned from various countries of Europe. The epicenter of everything being Italy, where also in the recent elections, Matteo Salvini, the deputy prime minister, who is also a far-right leader, and he is very anti-immigrant. Now, have a look at this on the opposite side. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel, although she has been facing some very stiff opposition back home, is a strong proponent for immigration and has always welcomed them with a happy face back home. But these issues of immigration and trade are dividing the world. If we talk about trade, then President Trump, Vladimir Putin, both these leaders are, they are proponents of unilateralism. Trump stands for America first. He has already pulled the US out of Trans-Pacific Partnership. We know of the tensions that existed in the G7 summit this year, just before Trump attended the summit with Kim Jong-un in the month of June this year. Just before that, in the Global 7 summit, there were some tensions because Trump simply didn't stand for multilateralism, and he has already been threatening to cut budgets to the NATO as well. So very briefly, these two issues of immigration and trade are dividing the world on a very great scale. Our own country, India, has a Hindu nationalist government which is far right and is seen as a threat by liberals and leftists, not just in India and across the world. So in this entire weekend events of commemorations of the Armistice Centenary, Emmanuel Macron has sort of presented himself as an alternative leader to the unilateralism, the anti-immigration, the far-right nationalism, which is being propagated by the likes of Trump, by the likes of Narendra Modi, by the likes of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, by the likes of Putin. And this is some significant symbolism which could have some very significant impact on the world geopolitics in the coming months and years. So this was all I had to talk about this. And also there's a brief reminder of a very very special series which is being covered by the BBC this entire week. They're giving space to it this entire week, which is Beyond Fake News. They are going to talk about on a critical scale, very comprehensively about fake news, the impact of it, how to tackle it across countries of Africa, and they are talking about India on a very special note. So they are giving space to it in all of their programs this entire week. So you should check it out if you can. And at the same time, for the very latest, you should follow me on Twitter. The description for which will be in the comments on the description of the video. And if you do share your comments on which side are you on, the nationalist side or the liberal multilateralist side propagated by Emmanuel Macron. Thank you very much for watching.